Welcome to the Mary Mavis Show, the show that focuses on remarkable results and your personal power. Here is your host, Mary Mavis.
So I am super excited today to introduce my guest. John O'Brien is the co-founder and chairman of ARdVRk Technologies. ARdVRk is a technology firm transforming the way biopharmaceutical and medical device companies use augmented and virtual reality to engage and educate healthcare practitioners and especially patients. In addition to his entrepreneurial venture at ARdVRk, John has a broad and deep experience leading sales forces, therapeutic areas, and strategy work in the pharmaceutical industry. It's almost exactly 20 years since I met John. He and I worked. I was his coach individually, and then worked with him across a number of leadership teams within the organization. So we've done a lot of deep work. I can tell you that I probably learned as much from John as he did from me. And that is what happens when you become a thinking partner with someone. So today we're going to be talking about one of the skills that is sometimes elusive for young leaders, as well as just challenging for most of us. And that is how to be strategic in your influencing in a very complex matrix. So John, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here, Mary, as always.
Great. So I'm going to, this part of the show is, what do you wish you knew early on in your career that has been so helpful? And so I'm going to just let you set the stage for the story and begin, and we'll see where it goes.
Excellent. So having to pick from several hundred, I think I came up with, listening to the question, two that were probably the most important. The first is, especially when you're early in your career and there's so many things that you're trying to track and do and you're distracted by, you sometimes don't recognize that there's a wonderful amount of information around you, especially about people, both your allies, maybe potentially your detractors, your colleagues, your superiors. And there's so much data out there that you can acquire to really understand them better as people and not necessarily as your peers or the people who work on your particular team or your boss. And if I had thought about it that way, I would have been very curious and have a lot more fun, even in the stressful times, trying to understand that information and how it can help me get stuff done. And the second part of that is understanding yourself as a person. I think you tend to look at it more, sometimes, at least this is for me, others may be different, that you weren't born with a balance sheet from the very beginning of assets and liabilities, and you acquired more traits and characteristics that were helpful for you, and you try to minimize some of the liabilities. But, particularly in stressful times, when the table stakes are high, you tend to forget that you do have some things that you can use to your advantage and use them intentionally, not just that they're natural gifts, but use them intentionally. And think about some of your liabilities, especially your insecurities, and how that comes across to people, and how you view them, what lens you look at them from. So when I put those two things together, if I took a step back and had a time machine and went back, I would say, wow, let me just get really interesting about the people around me and really interesting about myself, and not look at it as this kind of zero-sum winning and losing type of game, if you like.
Yeah, I remember walking into your office for one of our All About John meetings, and you saying, I got it. I got what you've been talking about. And of course I thought, oh, what's that? And you said, Mary, it's all about the people. Mm-hmm. And what you're saying is the same thing. It's all about the people. How can you observe how can you make good observations, and how do you really get to know yourself and honor the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So how was that valuable? Set the stage for working in a complex environment, because it is probably even more complex now. We're far more global, dispersed across the world, but some of the same complexities in the kinds of teams and issues that you dealt with.
Right. So, maybe by way of example, to spin a little yarn here or tell a story, and before I go into that, it's really important to recognize that as you progress at each stage of your career and go down that journey or path, not only do the problems get more complex, that, if you're lucky enough to be put in a position where they're actually asking for you to lead and affect a change in a particularly tricky area, but the relationships themselves become complex, because we all Mary, I remember we'd have many conversations about the tribes and tribal behavior and all that kind of stuff. So the R&D tribe, they had their people that they trusted. They had a network of relationships, and by the very nature of their work and in some cases the way they're wired, that was almost fundamentally different from the folks on the commercial side of the business. And so as my career kind of evolved and I got more involved in that web between the commercial side and the R&D side, and by the way, everything in between too, right? Legal and regulatory,
right? Exactly,
and all those things. It became more challenging for me to use my old toolkit of just going to the people I knew, the people who loved me, and ignoring the people who really didn't love me at all and actually found me to be a real irritant to them, because I was trying to do something that was almost fundamentally different than the way we were running our business. And as you'll recall, one of the most important projects that we kind of co-created with my team was this idea of, you can change the way drugs are developed at AstraZeneca. And I think when we first talked about it, I was like, yeah, right. How are like me and my team going to be able to do that? We kind of set out thinking about exactly that. How do we do that? So I recognized that I had quite a number of allies, a lot in R&D, quite a few in commercial, but at the higher levels, I actually had the support of the C-suite, which was great, right? Because, okay, here we go. You have all the support, you got relationships, you have people believing in this as a compelling, exciting thing that they would want to be part of. But I had one particular challenge with, a person who had been my boss, a few times. And it started, when I reflected on the relationship in the beginning, it was like, I was very interested in the fact that it started off actually really pretty cool. And then as he became more, influential within the organization and he was on this path, he wanted to eventually put himself in a position to become the CEO. I found that our agendas didn't match. And my interpretation was that, well, it's all about him and he's just doing it for political reasons, or he doesn't like my project, and all this stuff that swirls around in your head. And I don't think of the latter that much, like, well, whether you like it or don't like it, but I'm a human being too, right? So I'm like, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? So my natural reaction was, okay, well, I'll just do it on my own. And then I would get mischievous with that. And oh boy, I'm moving the ball here. And he doesn't like it. And when I thought of it, I said, well, wait a minute, now, that's not really role modeling particularly good leadership. Even if people weren't seeing it, it didn't feel right to me. So I considered the possibility that maybe I was just as annoying to him as he was to me. And as I was gaining influence in the organization, and doing things that were attracting the attention of the C-suite, maybe he felt that was getting in the way of his agenda. Well, first of all, I shouldn't be judging his agenda anyway. It's his agenda. And that actually it was getting harder to move on this initiative about bringing the organization together to bring the best possible thinking into the drug discovery and development process. So it was getting more difficult, but I still could do it. And then I said, well, this isn't even getting fun. It's getting more stressful because he's getting agitated. And I recall conversations with you and then another person you know very well. We were actually sitting in a restaurant in Sweden, and he was a very close confidant in this individual. And I wasn't working for him at the time. I was actually reporting indirectly to the C-suite. And he said, you really have a great opportunity here. And I go, how's that? And I said, well, it's pretty obvious that my former boss was interested in positioning himself as the CEO, but he was kind of viewed as this classic salesperson. And he really had to demonstrate to the powers that be, including the board, that, he understood the complexities of the organization, both more globally, because he was somebody who ran a big U.S. business, but also across the functions. And he said, man, you could really, really give him something he wants. And, after a couple of years, I'm like, well, that's the problem. Why do I always have to give him something he wants? And he said, well, you're going to probably move a lot faster with his support, and you may actually need it. So I said, you know what, you really have given me something to think about. And I set up these monthly meetings with him, which he loved, right? Because he was getting briefed on this project, which was going directly to the CEO and the board. And he could play with me. He could join in. And he became actually a big advocate of it and was extraordinarily helpful, because I wasn't approaching him anymore as, the guy who I thought wanted everything to be about him, even though it was. I was approaching him more like, okay, I need everybody in the organization to help me pull this through. And I want to get it done really, really fast and make a big impact so I can go on to the next thing. Because as you know, Mary, I kind of get bored after a while, and then I have to go on to the next thing. And so just by taking a step back and understanding him more as a person and appealing to things that would help him, it's made an extraordinary difference.
And so, in the book, that's a perfect example of backing up, thinking about what the person cares about, and then going in the door that they're already standing in. So if your boss is standing in the door of, I really want to have some credit, I want to be engaged in this, I want it to be, whatever, a part of my legacy. And I think, then if you say, instead, I don't need him, I'll just go do it myself because I don't like that. Your example is, shifting and saying, how can I get in there and find the way to engage him through his lens, through what he cares about. And Exactly. Then it blossomed from there, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, after I read your book and thought about the people who you're now trying to help, who really do need a new way to access wisdom and stories and insights from people who have been down this path. The one thing I would say to your audience, because I was listening with great interest to what you were just saying, and the thing that occurred to me going back into the memory bank was I took your going through the door quite literally, and I set up these meetings to have these personal interactions with them. And today with a text, and I talked to my sons who are in their 30s, and it's like, well, did you talk to your brother? Yeah, I've been talking to him. Well, he just said you're not talking to him. And I said, yeah, we're texting all the time. And I said, oh, okay, well, is that talking now? And I said, remember, you're writing a word. It's the same thing as, sending somebody a letter back in the day, or then an email, and now you're texting, and now you're doing all these other things. Don't miss that opportunity to walk actually literally walk in their door and have a conversation with them and get them excited about, what you're doing. And I think for this group also now, vulnerability and authenticity is a big thing. And and often for the people I still coach, I say, you can't read a book and then be authentic. You have to be authentic, and you can't, do faux vulnerability. You have to go in there and put something on the line and say, you know what, I could use your help. And what do you lose for that? Or I'm sorry, you don't lose anything. You have an unlimited number of sorries. And you got to get your ego out of the way and then go have that personal interaction where you're eyeball to eyeball.
That's right. And now, particularly over the last year and a half, when I talk with young leaders, they feel very limited in what they can do to reach out to senior people. And of course, I always say, well, why don't you set up 15 minutes on their calendar for a call? You never know. Yeah. And so it's I was thinking about your story, because you said you got sort of some tips about why your boss really cared about what you were doing. And if you didn't have those tips, you'd have to find a way to find out what's important to the person. Mm-hmm. You would have to get out of your own irritation and annoyance, right? And stop yourself and say, I have no idea what's going on with this person. Why don't I find out? Mm-hmm.
That's right. And a little trick that I learned a long time ago, and don't ask me the origins of it because it was likely in a book that I read. And the trait they said you should develop in listening is listen as if you're wrong and then speak to be right. And I think when I turned that corner, it made a big difference because, your brain, the way it works, especially in high stress situations, or at least my brain, because we're all unique, is sometimes I default to, I have these 5 things I want to get across or I want to speak. And and especially if it's a person who I find to be more on the threat side of the board than the support side of the board, I'm not listening to them, and I'm listening to it through a filter of, I don't like you, you're not on my side. So I'm going to come in and I can be very combative when I get that way. So I'm sure that it becomes quite palpable to the person on the other side that, wait a minute now, you came in here with this olive branch and this, and I had a notion that you wanted to have this meeting together, but you're prepared with your thing. And you're really not interested in my thing. And as a matter of fact, you almost seem like you're poised in your body language to go to war. And so when I started to listen differently, I started to hear differently and speak and act differently.
Yeah. I think about, for me, I'm particularly plagued when I either am an expert or I think I'm an expert on a topic. And then when I don't agree, I often push my ideas out into as if it, now hear this is the truth. Mm-hmm. and rather than really getting interested in why does this person think a different way? Mm-hmm. And of course it depends. I mean, in the, I was thinking about, the ability to get up above it's one of the subsections in the book, up above the battleground, mm-hmm. and look at the people and look at the play and think about what happens. And then, consider not just the understanding of the person, but also the understanding of the dynamics. Mm-hmm. And then think about, how do I engage? And for me, it's often, if I'm an expert, is to pull back and not be so forward in my thinking, mm-hmm. pull it out.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So what else about that example? Anything else that you wanted to talk about in terms of the whole?
Yeah, like maybe just one other thing is, as you do the whole idea of, getting up to the balcony and watching the opera or play or flying AWACS around the battlefield or whatever it might be. In the heat of the moment, it's very difficult to do that. And this idea of preparation to what do you got? What do you have that you can use? And we often find it so hard to take 10 to 15 minutes just to be reflective, and working on the international side and working with a lot of different cultures. There's some cultures in particular, which may be another podcast, that are very, very reflective. And for a person like me, who in some ways I'm the opposite of you, Mary, because I'm too much sometimes on the front foot and I'm not bringing other people along with me and I'm not using all that information. So everybody needs to understand that these are things that require practice. Yeah. And when you practice them and you go deep, you find little clues that don't seem significant at the time, but then later on could be incredibly valuable. And so in that relationship, the final point I'll make is that in the beginning, and throughout, no matter where we were in that spectrum of knocking heads, he would share family types of information and stories, what was going on. And my friend who had given me the idea of like, look, you can really give him something he wants and you're going to benefit from him. He said that was incredibly unique and unusual, that he is a very private person, because I still communicate with him from time to time. And he would share these things with me. And I said, isn't that fascinating? Like, of all the people, why is he sharing this with me? And I just kind of came to the conclusion that maybe he wanted to have a relationship that was deeper, but maybe wasn't as good at navigating that because that's not the way he's wired. So that kind of gave me a little clue. You know what? He probably isn't finding making a relationship with me easy. Maybe not so much because of me, because I'm usually pretty easy to form a relationship with, but maybe I need to go back to that again and strike that up. And that could open up a new possibility with us, which it did.
Yeah. Well, so what you're saying is that by going in his door and being able to accomplish what you wanted by fitting it into his frame and you built some trust with him. And he was, it's lonely at the top. I mean, it's lonely in senior leadership roles for exactly the thing that you're talking about, which is that it's also very competitive. The higher you go in an organization, the more competitive it is. And that doesn't matter who you are. There are fewer and fewer spots for you to progress to. So, what I hear you saying is that you not only were able to be effective with him and influencing him, and you influenced him without influencing him. You influenced him with taking your approach. And then out of that, recognize that, he might have even been more interested in a relationship than you ever thought.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you hit on a huge point, and per usual between you and I, we'll spend an hour on one topic, really peeling it back. So maybe just one final comment on that is that with the group that's coming through now, the millennials, and whether you call them Gen Z or iGen or whatever, there's this kind of tension in the system of, are you being true to yourself? Are you selling out? And all of this, right. Because there's much more social awareness about a lot of different things. And so this idea about, are you doing it on somebody else's terms, or can you do it on your own terms, is really at the heart, or equal terms maybe, at the heart of authenticity. Because if you go in there with some contrived way of, I want to be your ally, I want to walk in your door and get in your world and all that stuff, people are smart and they'll see through that. So you do have to be thoughtful about ensuring that you're bringing your best and real self forward too, because that's later on. I think we're going to talk about personal power and versus positional power and that. But there is a power in being who you are, and you in those types of conversation, particularly when they get gritty and tough. If you kind of go in and say, "Yeah, I understand this person is their terms, but I also have I'm going to show respect, but I demand respect back in return," I think is a key challenge for the generation that's coming through that are middle managers. How do you navigate that, and how do you figure out how to be your best self and get things on a more even playing field, if you like?
Well, being influential is not being manipulative. Being influential is understanding the other person's perspective and what's important to them, and seeing and not manipulating your own view to meet theirs, but finding some common ground or positioning as a way of an entry point. That's the whole sort of go in the door that they're standing in. It's much more effective than dragging them through your door. Mm-hmm. If they don't have, if they don't have the same perspective. But I think, when you really are authentically interested in the shared outcome with that person, then they will trust you. And that actually is very much what you created in that relationship.
That's right on.
So, John, you said to me, it's all about the people. And in my book, one of the chapters is called People Are Funny. And that's not funny, haha. That's just funny, unique. And we're all challenging to other people. You talked about in your story being potentially challenging for your boss. How are you funny, challenging, difficult to deal with? And if you were working for someone just like you, what would you recommend people do?
Run away. So, just a bit of context. I think who you become has a lot to do with your experiences, as a, just an obvious statement. But because the path that I, in many cases, chose, but many cases was chosen for me in terms of career, both opportunities and challenges, was that I was put in situations where, to keep it really simple, something was either really, really badly broken or needed to be started up pretty quickly, but that had risk and required you to kind of put your career aspirations or intentions a little bit in the backseat. And indeed, a lot of people wouldn't even take some of those assignments, but I always thought they were exciting and kind of fun and really important, probably most of the reason why I took them. And because of the nature of that journey, I found that I was not, and sometimes by any stretch of the imagination, the subject matter expert going in. I was literally sent over, put into the group. Here's the mess or the problem, or here's the reason why we've got to get this started up and going in the right direction very, very quickly. So when you're not the subject matter expert, you learn pretty quickly. And I learned, we can talk about some of the missteps if you like, but I think they're going to actually come out in how I'm funny, was that you needed to marshal those people together very, very quickly and get them aligned with you, because, putting it bluntly, Mary, I would have people coming up and saying, I have no idea why you have this job. You have absolutely no training in this. Like, yeah, but I'm here. So let's get into it, because I have a job to do and so do you. And I found that for me, getting people around a compelling vision was the first step. And I probably obviously read that from a Jack Welch from GE book or something. I would develop this compelling vision that everybody finds it as compelling as you do. And then build an organization of people around that who they believe that the strategy and the tactics and how you execute is going to get to that vision. But you got to get them to start not believing in the bad stuff that had gone on or the risk and get them focused in that way. And the way I would do that is by a lot of interaction. And you're probably going to laugh at this story. A lot of interaction, a lot of passion. I generally use humor in stressful situations to kind of get people to get, untracked from the doom and gloom, or did I cause this? And many times people are like, I was part of the cause of this problem. I go, yeah, but I don't care about that. I don't have a time machine. I want you to be part of the solution. And so humor was really important to me. I did an enormous amount of walking around and going to people's offices and talking to them, and especially the people who I felt were really important to the mission, and wanted them to feel loved and appreciated, and that I had their back, right? Because you got to provide air cover in those situations too. If people say, okay, you're a lunatic and you're going down this path, and they're probably just going to pull you out and put you in another situation, and then we're all going to be left here, without jobs or whatever the case may be. You had to, get them to trust you by saying, look, I want you to know that I am going to protect this group because it's me who has set this course and I'm taking responsibility, but I'm going to make it really clear what you're accountable for and how I'm going to hold you to account. And that's where you and I started to do the work of, like, how do we put together a leadership team? How do you put outcomes for remarkable results, that you all buy into? And then how are you going to behave and treat each other was always the last part of that exercise. So that all sounds great, right? I do this, everybody's energized, they're all jazzed, they feel like they can talk to me, they can feel like they can come in my office and all this great stuff. But what I found out through, an audit, I believe that you did for one of the business units that I ran back in the day, was that I went in and pinged people and I rang their bells. And especially people who are a little bit more on the introversion side and needed their time to consider this outpouring of energy and ideas. And I drove them nuts. I would suck the life out of them. They certainly were behind me and they liked being in the group and all that. But I was doing, with the best of intentions, bad ideas with good intentions. I was doing what I thought I would like, to be energized and to be heard and to be included. But I was driving them kind of crazy because they were like, he just came into my office. Do I have something to do? Did he give me an assignment? We were whiteboarding stuff. There was all this energy and I didn't get a word in edgewise. And then he left and I'm like drained and what is this? And so I remember he said, you're ringing people's bells. And so I said, oh, okay, well, I kind of have to stop doing that. So that was kind of a first step, and I modified my behavior, and we introduced this concept of I time, which I've actually even done within my own family, because there are some people who are outwardly have extroversion, but they really need that I time just to sit and think and just digest it all. And so I modified that. And then I found that when times became particularly stressful, and if my belief was that there was a particular person or group that wasn't getting it done, I also had a little bit of a blind side that I don't really care about titles and things like that. I just think I'm me and they're them and we're all in it together. And other people in my group, they said, you don't understand, you're the vice president of this business unit. They don't look at you as just good old John, who, you said something really harsh, and these people are thinking you're going to lop their heads off because you're angry with them. And I go, well, I'm not angry with them. I'm just angry that we allowed ourselves to get into this position or whatever it was. And they said, you have got to be much more self-aware of your position with the organization. Other people do take titles very seriously. And when you switch on the dime, it's not exactly Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but it's getting pretty close. You just switch really, really quickly, and people are getting an impact and an effect that I know you don't want. And that was a big aha for me because, again, I was so well intended. And I wanted everybody to know that we were all bringing it together, and we were going to, have these open relationships and all this stuff. It's actually pretty naive the more I'm listening to myself talk.
So you were very lucky because somebody interrupted you to say, this is what's going on. This is what I hear. This is what I see. Whether it was me, it doesn't matter. I mean, you certainly have people who can you trust to tell you what's going on. Now, if someone has a boss that's passionate, really smart, inserts themselves into the dialogue, lays out a big plan, then exits stage right, what can somebody do to be more effective? And yet they need their eye time. What can they do to be most effective with that boss?
So I think that if you frame something up for somebody who is your boss, and I probably are going down the path of the way I like it, and I'm assuming a degree of trust, so we should maybe follow on with you, and like, well, okay, well, what if you don't have that? And I'm going to try and think a little bit more about it because I did not really find myself in those situations very often. I kind of was raised to be that being direct and transparent required courage, but it's also a sign of respect. And so my coaching has always been, just take your boss out for a cup of coffee and make sure you focus first on, the positive stuff that's going on. But then I found that if I appealed for help, you may not get the reaction right away because people get defensive. And like you said before, especially when you are dealing in a higher table stakes game and you're dealing with more, superiors who are all over the world and things like that, you're bringing a problem to them. They get agitated. So you gotta put yourself in their shoes, in their world. You got to frame it up in a way that you're not a threat. But you offer it up as this is great, but it kind of could be even better. And I just need a little bit of help because I want to give you my best. And I'll give you my best. You give me 10 minutes to think about it, and go back to your office. And because I used humor, people could tease me about that. And they would just say, go away. I'll come back to you, because I knew deep down they absolutely have my best interest at heart, I think that's the goal. Well, it's a shared goal, certainly, but I think you need to take some responsibility with your boss to be a partner in that, to help them understand how they can help you.
Yeah. So I hear that as with confidence, approaching your boss to say, I'm so committed to the work that you have underway. There's a part of the communication pattern between us that I'm not tracking as quickly on, or whatever you want to say about it. And here's something that would work better for me if you can do it. And I understand you're my boss and you might not be able to do it, but I just wanted to make sure you know what I'm experiencing. And
I think the German,
not every boss can you say that, but I would always say, try it. Yeah. If you're confident and you're capable and in that role, you never know. You will never know if you simply become at the effect of that kind of pattern.
So 2 points to that, because again, given the audience, number one, I think the germinating conditions for that now, and being in a health technology business that generally does have most of the people who are coming through in digital technology are younger, certainly. And my read on it is that there's a lot more space for those conversations, that organizations are saying, it's not just about work-life balance. It's also about how you as a leader are keeping in tune to be there to try and help your people. So maybe that's a little bit optimistic, but I get a sense that that's the way the world is turning right now. So there's that. So there's a good opportunity. But the second thing, so everybody who may be listening and then doing the big palpable eye roll right now is that, are you kidding me? My boss would have my head on the end of a stick as a prize, because they're not on my side and they're not on anybody's side. So, coming full circle, use all of that as an information. To your point, you go in, you give it a try, you have the confidence to do it. You did your job. And if you do it in the right way, that's sensitive and it's not whiny and annoying and all about me, you've given that boss their best shot to react to that. And what a wonderful thing that is, right? Because I certainly benefited from when people told me I was nuts, right? And I went back and modified. But if they don't, now you have another piece of information, because the journey will go on and the relationships will change, and that person may come in and out of your corporate life. But now you've got another piece of information. And just like I did back then with the boss who I thought was malevolent at one time, and then we can't kind of turn that around. There was lots of information along the way that you acquire. And sometimes, I'll say it out loud, self-preservation matters.
Yes, perfectly said. John, we're going to move into the last piece. You referenced it earlier. The question is, what's your personal power? And that's not about authority. It's really about the way that you think and operate, that you could pull the thread through over time as something you use in so many different ways in your life.
Well, I started to allude to it earlier, but just maybe to flesh it out, and then maybe we can kick around a story or two. But I think by the very nature of a lot of it were around what I believed about how you handle situations that are really testing your ability to demonstrate both courage and selflessness, right? Mm-hmm. And because of my, look, I was raised that way by my parents, and I'm very proud of that, and I'm forever grateful that they raised me to always be thinking about doing what's right and putting your own personal ambitions aside. I'm a human being. There's people who could say, well, you didn't always do that. And I'll say, yeah, no, I didn't, because I'm human and I make mistakes. But I had that, and then it was combined quite naturally with all of these assignments that would never, ever have been as impactful as they were if I didn't behave that way and have a team of people who also, once I allowed them to have that similar belief that, okay, forget all about this. What is the right thing to do here? Right. We shouldn't shut this company down. My first assignment when I went over to England was to shut a company down. And 3 years later, we turned it around and spun it up because we believed that shutting it down was the wrong thing to do. And the third time I went into my boss's office, people could hear him yelling at me down the hallway, and they all thought I was fired. And then he called me the next day and he said, I lost sleep over this. You're right. It's the wrong thing to do to shut it down. Because maybe I was, just not wise enough to know that that was potentially career ending. But it was just the way to do it. There really was no other way than to have everybody get off of what's the political agenda here? What's the safe thing to
Right.
do? And so you can't operate that way without stopping every second of the way and considering, do I have the positional power to do this? Are people going to be angry? You're damn right. In every one of those assignments, there's a lot of people I'm not getting birthday cards from anymore, because they were very, very angry that it wasn't just me. It was the team that I led. We all went forward as one to say the right thing to do is to not kind of fold to the safe option or whatever it might be. And I think when you take that that orientation, you develop this notion that, okay, I really have to have a real clear idea of what my superpowers are. Yeah. And I think my superpowers to be able to do that, there's no other way to put it, was just to have the guts, I suppose, and the singular focus that we have a strategy, we have a plan, mm-hmm. This is it. You can stamp and yell and all that. And I would always say at the end of those very testy sessions, that's fine. You're the boss. I will do what you tell me to do.
Right.
But I had one boss tell me, I was leaving. He goes, no, you go do it that way. And he goes, but if it blows up in your face, it's on you. And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, good for you. And he said, a lot of people do what I tell them to do. And then when it blows up in their face, they come back and they say, but you told me to do that. And he said, yeah, but what am I paying you for?
Exactly. Twisted around. So here's the thing, John. Here's what I hear. And knowing you, I know this is, whether you call it a personal power or superpower, that your agenda is to get the right outcome for the business and or whatever the entity is. And when you have that as your frame of reference for each of those very challenging conversations, what I think happens is people trust you more. They trust to be in that conversation with you. They, the worst reputation you can have is to have that truly, this is a person who puts their career first before everything. And so what you're saying is you always put what the business outcome was, what the right thing to do. I love that. What's the right thing to do? And maybe you're wrong, but at least they're going to know what you think the right thing to do is, and respectfully.
Yeah, and there's a nugget in there. So there's two bits. One, from my final job in corporate before I retired and then started ARdVRk. And it's somebody you know very well, who's on the R&D side and you're pals with, and you still do work with and stay in contact with. And when we were trying to figure out how to maximize the investment in R&D, but also de-risk a lot of the late stage failures, it was imperative that the people in the organization, whether they were running a clinical study team or part of the commercial organization, came forward and spoke their truth. Their truth as they know it, right? Because a lot of things can change as you go along. And I remember him coming and he said, okay, you got it, everybody. Everybody's going to say, before this goes forward, that they think that this aspect of the clinical trial is absolutely a disaster, or thinking we can launch in these countries is going to be really, really hard unless we do the study differently, or whatever it might be. And people were very reluctant to do that, because the way it was set up was that they would go into this investment board, and in the past it was 80 slides, and all the C-suite people hated it because they weren't getting the right information. But when they would get the right information, they didn't like it, so they would yell at them. So everybody got singed in the dragon's den. And then they went out and they said, well, there you go. I just told the truth and I got the hell beat out of me. Nobody wanted to hear that. And I said, you did your part. You spread the word through the R&D organization. I'll do my part. And I sat down with the CTO and the CFO. I said, this is the way it's going to be. And they're like, yeah, but John, if they're not doing this, this, and this, and they're not getting a good try, and I go, this is the point. The minute you say or you behave in a way that says you cannot tell the truth, all bets are off. And I said, no, by the way, then I'm done with this job. I'll go back to the United States and call it a day. And so that trust has to be matched up with the behavior of the people that are around you, especially me in this case, that I wouldn't betray them, that I wouldn't leave them hanging there, that I would stand up in the meeting and say, wait a minute now, I'm going to call it because I had that power at the time. We're going to take a time out. We're going to have a little caucus here because we're not having the right kind of conversation around a $500 million investment or whatever it was at the time. Right. So that's one bit. The second bit, Mary, is because a lot of people within your audience are probably thinking about, is it difference between big and really small, like in an entrepreneurial endeavor? And that one requires a really a lot of thought. By my experience so far has been, it's the same. It may be exacerbated a little bit in a smaller organization because you're constantly on the precipice of not enough time and not enough money and making these big decisions and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so the table stakes are high. But I've known some, and I've really tried as the founder of my company not to be the addicted to my own Kool-Aid founder who's you got to believe. And then all the development teams are, I'm not going to tell him that we need another 2 weeks to do this. So I would ask everybody just kind of reflect on your individual situation, but don't default to well, bigger is different than smaller. That's different than medium. And it's different in this function, that function. It really isn't. The fundamental behavior is the same.
And it's no different in a nonprofit foundation. So it's a human thing.
It's a human.
And so, a very powerful personal stance. I want to thank you for your time today, John. Thank you so much being on the show.
It was fun. Thanks, Mary.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Today's show was produced by Eric Aubrey. Our theme music was written and produced by Eric Aubrey and Tim McKinstry. The show's graphics were designed by Devin Marciano. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on Google, Apple, or Spotify. You can also find episodes at maviscompany.com, where I invite you to sign up for my weekly newsletter. I hope you use some nugget to help you create remarkable results in your world. Thank you for listening.